Introduction like that, you're either in need of a lot of prayer or quite schizophrenic. And I'm probably a little both. But it's good to be with you with my others today. I heard my dear brother say a word about prayer, and whatever tradition you pray in, I ask you to join me. Gracious God, thank you for the gift of life one more time, and the opportunity to serve you. We ask, God, your favor, your mercy, and your strength and wisdom upon these who care about children who are not even their own, about teachers and educators who need voices and advocates. Thank you for the privilege to serve and the grace to be able to do it. Amen. I am glad to be with you this morning, fresh from a round-robin trip. Started in North Carolina on Thursday, beginning into D.C. with John Lewis at the special brain trust panel talking about post the March on Washington, where do we go? Then flying to Chicago to be with SEIU, Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas, as we talked about connections between unions and education and the labor movement, healthcare, and then to where they've actually closed 52 schools in Chicago, and then to Detroit to be with the Michigan State Conference, where they're battling similar issues, privatization, the bankruptcy of Detroit, which is actually a scheme that's been going on for years. A lot of it started as way back as the McKinley-Bradley case, which sought to slow down the effects of the Swan case in Charlotte. You know that history. And then here on this morning. I want today for a moment, on this Sunday morning, I'm so privileged to be here with you who are doing such great work. And I told my good friend, she asked me to come, that I was going to blame her for everything. Right there, Catherine, everything.
Well, if you made it here, you can blame me for everything.
I want, though, to do a little history. And I don't just want to talk about education. And I want, hey Chris, I want to talk about some things we must do even if you don't get the grant. I want to talk about what you have to do if you don't get funded. I want to talk about transformative movement building rather than transactional movement building. Transactional is where it's just based on one issue, or where it's based on where the money says you have to go in a particular season. And I might get on your nerves a little bit. And I might question some of the things that you have on the wall, and I don't mean disrespect, but I want to challenge you and challenge myself as well. There is a scripture, so warm here. There's a scripture that says, thank you, Steve, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 3, can you not discern the signs of the time? And I want to talk about where we are in history, which is a watershed moment, and why, if you know where we are, you will understand more clearly what we have to do. I see my friends from North Carolina. Now, in theology, we never attempt to interpret the scripture, or we shouldn't, without understanding the historical moment, or what the Germans call the Sitzenleben. Say that again. Sitzenleben. Sitzenleben. Sitzenleben, which literally means the setting of the text. Now, I believe also the same must be true of movements. and of the movement for civil rights, the movement for a term we created in a group up at MIT, sustainability, and the movement for equality. Movements are rooted in history. Turn to somebody and say that. Say, movements are rooted in history. I'm an African-American preacher, I like a little call in this part. And movements are informed by history. And history is not stagnant, but it ebbs and it flows. So not only must we celebrate the fact that we're here 50 years after the March on Washington, 50 years, 49 years after Bloody Sunday, 48 years after the Voting Rights Act, 49 years after the Civil Rights Act. Not only must we celebrate, we also must understand where we are in history, where we've come from, in order to be informed by it so that we know what fights we must continue. Anybody, once someone said, that doesn't remember history is doomed to repeat it. As a Christian, Jesus actually says to us, for me, that my actions that I engage in must be rooted in this. This do in remembrance of me. So what I do is rooted in history. My life's work in the course of liberation should be informed by what I remember. Now let me say parenthetically, that is why I think that oftentimes we make a mistake in organizing. And we try to come in and organize in the moment without understanding the moment we're in. Amen. And understanding the connectors in history. So we start organizing around an immediate problem, like the fact that the legislature in North Carolina has a supermajority of extremists, without stopping for a moment and understanding how this particular moment connects to history. But it's also why extremists today who promote racialized public policy are always fighting against social remembering and would rather that we live in social amnesia. So this morning, like the Sankofa bird, or Sankofa bird, it's an image in Africa. A bird is flying forward looking backwards. Let me help us look back in order to understand how we must go forward together and not take one step back. And the reason you have to do this in America, and particularly in the South, you can't organize in the South without first understanding the history and the Achilles heel that is always lurking around in the South. Because of America's original sin of racism and classism, America has always been a nation under construction. That's why you can't organize in the South and try to develop an organizing strategy and all you want to talk about is how it affects poor children. You must deal with race and class connected.
All right.
America's always under construction. On the back of the dollar bill, there's an unfinished pyramid. The top is separated from the bottom, and then beneath is the all-seeing eye, which is an ancient Egyptian masonry concept. Because even the forefathers of this country knew what they were creating was flawed. That's why they put a Constitution together that could be amended. Derek Lamar said the best thing about the American Constitution is the fact that it could be amended. That's the best thing about it. Let's talk about two periods of Reconstruction in order to understand where we are now. The first one I want to lift up this morning is in 1868, we had the beginning of what many call the first Reconstruction. Now, touch your neighbor and say, he's talking about right now. By talking about back then. Now, don't lose me now. Now, don't go to sleep. You say, I thought they brought Reverend Bob in here to fire us up and stay with us. Because see, the other thing you got to understand that being fired up ain't just hollering and saying, go get it. Your fire must be informed fire. So in 1868, we had the beginning of the first Reconstruction. Black and white Lincoln Republicans. You need to grab that term. There's a difference between a Lincoln Republican and a moderate Republican than a current day extremist. Lincoln Republicans joined together in a mighty fusion political alliance. I said in 1868, in the South, blacks and whites were working together. I said in 1868, not 2008, not 1968, but 1868. Fact of the matter is, while they never held office in proportion to their numbers, African Americans in the South in 1868 wielded significant power in every state house. In fact, in North Carolina in 1868, there were more African Americans in the legislature than we have today. And they were connected with Lincoln Republicans. And from 1865 to 1900, black majority interracial alliances in southern states rose up and began to change fundamentally public policy. Now, you often have been taught this in school. That almost every 10 southern legislators were controlled by African Americans working with progressive whites. In fact, they had the majority in 10 states, and in the other they didn't have a majority, but they had enough of a caucus to join with progressive white to change the history of racism and discrimination and all those things that had come prior to the end of the Civil War. In the South in 1868, first Reconstruction. And in these caucuses, they rose up first and changed voting rights. First Constitution that was written in North Carolina had several things in it. Listen, this is not 2000 or 1900. This is what was in a Constitution written by blacks and whites in 1868. We hold it to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Equal protection under the law was in North Carolina's Constitution before it was in the federal Constitution. Blacks and whites did that. Education was guaranteed in the Constitution. It's still not guaranteed in the federal Constitution today. But blacks and whites in the South, trying to get over the original sin of racism, put a clause in the state Constitution guaranteeing public education, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. In Article 6, Section 1 in our state Constitution, then in 1868, they said the only thing you needed to be qualified to vote was to be 18, born or naturalized in this country. 1868. They rose up to push for public education. Before 1875, North Carolina had a black assistant superintendent of public schools and a white 2 preachers. And they were the ones who insisted that public education was a constitutional right. Not just any kind of, what the courts have said is a sound quality, basic quality education. 1868. 1868. They rose up and they funded public education. They rose up and changed voting laws. They rose up and protected, and they outraged in 1868 conservatives by raising taxes for public education. 1868. Fusion politics. Blacks and whites coming together. They raised taxes. In fact, they also pushed fair tax policies that made the wealthy pay their fair share. They fought for labor rights in 1868. They changed criminal justice laws to make them more fair. 1868. They pushed for more access to health care. 1868. They attacked the rhetoric of white solidarity and pointed to the common interests of both black and white Southerners. These fusion coalitions took power. More than a quarter of white voters in the South voted for black majorities. 1868. In 1890, by 1890, the fusion movement of North Carolina was so popular that the candidates won the governorship, both Senate seats. And Mississippi, during this period, had the first black senator, Honorary. That got from South Carolina in the first black senator. Got a black lieutenant governor. You had this fusion politic, and their focus was voting rights, educational equality, equality in the criminal justice system, fixing the tax code so that the wealthy paid their fair share and those at the bottom didn't have to pay more than their fair share, and labor rights. And right in the middle of that, the Ku Klux Klan was formed, and the red shirts. And a movement called, because the radical racist Dixiecrats of this period could not stand this kind of black-white fusion that was reconstructing the nation. And so around 1870, I'm talking about then, but I'm also talking about now, they formed a group called the Redemption Movement. The Redeemers. Now they named it theologically, but it was quite heretical as it relates to what redemption ought to truly be. They called the Redemption Movement. And the Redemption Movement, or the Redeemers, their mantra, I don't know if y'all heard this again before, but their mantra was, we must take back America. I mean, I'm really talking about 1868. Their mantra was, we must take back America. And they launched a frontal attack against black-white fusion coalition. And the first thing they attacked was voting rights. And the third thing they attacked was fair tax policy. And the fourth thing they attacked was labor rights and criminal justice rights. And the fifth thing they attacked was any progressive leaders, black and white, who dared to believe that America could be reconstructed. They said in one statement, we must redeem the South from all of this interracial working together, because America can't be fair to everybody. We can't educate all these children. What's going to happen if you educate all these black and white children? What's going to happen? They howled about the use of tax money to support public education. They declared that the government was broke. 1870, 1880. They started riots in New Orleans and Wilmington and Atlanta. And they declared, as one editor said, we must ensure the permanent good government by the party of the white man. Racist, white supremacists declared this unity of black and white folk in the South had to be stopped, because you cannot have an America that's fair to everybody. You cannot have an America with black and white people working together for the betterment of all people. It's ungodly, and we must be redeemed from it. Took them in 1875, you had the Civil Rights Act passed that said you could not discriminate, no business could discriminate in hiring or in who it served. In 1875. By 1883, however, they had worked to get enough conservatives on the Supreme Court to overturn the Civil Rights Act of 75. And in 1883, they overturned it. By 1896, you had Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. 1898, you have the Wilmington riots, where duly elected blacks and whites were run out of office, and 3 to 5% of the city of Wilmington were killed, more people per capita than 9/11. And by 1900, the first Reconstruction was over. All of the black fusion alliances were cut out. Black voting power was dropped to nearly zero. White supremacists took over. And Charles B. Aycock in our state went around and said, in a few years, we're going to make it so that if you don't have a certain level of education, you can't vote. And he convinced white races to use property tax to build schools, but they only built them in black-white communities. And the goal was to ensure, so they actually privatized public education. And the first Reconstruction was shut down. And then right in the middle of that, the NAACP was founded. And the NAACP was founded by white people.
That's right.
There only about a few black people there. It was predominantly white. The first chairman was white. Was a white social worker out of New York. But they founded, you know, it was founded, it was blacks and whites and Jews, but they came together to believe in the possibility of a second Reconstruction.
Yeah.
And so what did they immediately begin to work on? Voting and education. And violence, because at that time, in 1900, black men were being emasculated because an average of 1 black man was being hung per day. But in the midst of all this pain, blacks and whites came together. And when you hear lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, when you hear us sing a song full of the hope that the president has brought us, James Wayne Johnson, the hope that the president has brought us was the hope of the first Reconstruction that had been ended. And now they were hoping again. Or when they say, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, they were talking about the hope impregnated in the nation by the first Reconstruction that was never finished. And that's why whites and blacks came together. They sang and they prayed, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears. And they sung this song. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our feet stray from the promises of the first Reconstruction. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Lest we forget that we can work together in the South. The South doesn't always have to be bound up. So they sang and they prayed and they organized. They organized an army of resistance. They believed that America could be America. They sang and they believed that the South could be changed. The shackles of hate and discrimination could be moved. They sang, and by faith they organized their lawyers. And then it happened again. In 1954, the second Reconstruction began. He had treated Chinese folk, Japanese folk, and other immigrants. Plus, they were dealing with the John Birch Society, which was funded by Freddie Koch, the daddy of Charles and David. So you know, if you understand that history, you understand why Charles and David are trying to live out the nightmare of their daddy. And Freddie Koch, the John Birch Society, had told President Eisenhower that if they win Brown, we're going to call for your impeachment and the impeachment of Brown. One of the members of that Supreme Court was a Ku Klux Klan. 9 white. And Thurgood Marshall didn't have a grant. There was no grant cycle. There was no what was E. Smith Reynolds want. It was the necessity and the need for, in fact, the matter, if you're going to organize the South and you really here because of the grant, you need to leave. I know that sounds offending. Because really it ain't about that. It's about the soul of the nation. I believe the money will come, but your motivation can't be that because it's disingenuous. This is about something deeper. Organize the South about something much deeper than a grant. It's about the soul of this nation. The last place we must change, if this nation is going to ultimately change, is below the Mason-Dixon line. That is always where the fight is. I'm a 3033 Mason, and many times he came to our group and asked, and they would raise money for me. He almost went broke, but he went in there. After all those years of planning for that second Reconstruction, all those court cases, and all those attempts, and all the legal theory, Charles Hamilton Houston, all the way back, and using the one dissenter on the Plessy versus Ferguson, there was one Supreme Court that dissented, and Thurgood and Charles Hamilton Houston utilized that dissent to build their attack. And it happened 9-0. Began the second Reconstruction. What did you see once again? You saw blacks and whites and now Latinos coming together, the labor movement, the civil rights movement coming together. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. And what did we see start happening in the Second Reconstruction? Well, 1954, you get Brown, but you also get Social Security being opened up to people in the agrarian culture and farms and to women, the domestic. Because when Senator Roosevelt pushed for Social Security, white Southern senators said, we'll pass it, but you got to make sure that these black folk don't get it and these women don't get it because they might get up with it. So in 1950, when it was passed in 1935, Social Security, if you were in the domestic area, you couldn't pay in. That meant 60% of white women couldn't get in. And if you were on a sharecropper, you were a sharecropper, you couldn't pay in, which meant the majority of black people couldn't get in. But in 54, we get the opening of the Social Security, Second Reconstruction. We get Medicaid, Medicare, we get labor unions being strengthened and building alliances with black workers that had been nullified by the end of the First Reconstruction. We get discrimination ended in public facilities because of the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks sits down, Martin Luther King stands up. We get a transformation. We get the sit-in movement led by young people in 1960 that transformed the movement. We get the March on Detroit, before the March on Washington, that connects jobs and justice. We get the 1964 Civil Rights Act, then Freedom Summer in 1964. Young people born. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. And all of these things are shaped in moral language, not Democrat versus Republican, not liberal versus conservative, but the moral language. We get resistance to Vietnam. We get a focus on poverty. In other words, from 1954 to 1968, we get a second Reconstruction. Now the first one was 1868 to 1900. And they shut it down in about 30-something years. You get 1954 to 1968, and once again, white supremacists and the greedy oligarchy that has never wanted to cash America's check of justice said this got to be stopped. You can't have all this access to public education by everybody. You can't have the people being lifted up out of poverty. That's too much fairness. It's got to be stopped. So they forged a plan for deconstruction. How can we forge a plan that's a white Southern and an urban strategy? They get white Southerners to vote and Northern suburban whites to vote against their own self-interest. But I want to talk about the white Southern strategy part of it. So they came up with a plan. This guy named Ken Phillips, who became Richard Nixon's campaign manager. Lee Atwater in 1976 went on the video and told the whole story. You know, he was about to die, got sick, but he told the whole story. He said Kevin Phillips went to Richard Nixon and said, we got to find a way to keep the South solid. But in order to do that, we got to make white people vote against their own best interests. So we got to learn how to talk race in code. He said in 1954, we knew how to win in the South, just use the N-word. That's what George Wallace did. But by 1964, he said, we can't use that word no more. But what we have is Barry Goldwater's mail list. But we can't be straight out racist because the Supreme Court has now changed. Separate equals shot down, got the Civil Rights Act of 64. So we got to talk race in code. And we got to raise hot button issues to get whites to vote against their own self-interest. That's why if you're going to organize in the South, you got to understand these code words, and your organizing can't just be about texts and emails and going to and sitting around trying to figure out what the legislature will give you. You got to decide whether you want to do transactional organizing or transformative organizing. See, transactional organizing goes in and says, well, the legislature is Republican, so for the next few years we're going to just, if we can just win this one thing, if we can just win this, so we can check it off on a little box and send it into the grant people. But transformative organizing said we must fight for the soul. So they decided to talk race and code. So here's the lexicon. Entitlement program. Became code word of freebie to black folk and undeserving white people. Cutting taxes meant cutting the ability to fund entitlement programs that's going to undeserving black folk and undeserving poor white people without them knowing what we're doing. and claiming that if you give more money to the wealthy, they would somehow it would trickle down. Forced busing, code word. We don't want to go to school with them. We want our own private schools with public dollars. We want neighborhood schools. Another term for it. We don't want to go to school with those black and brown people. But we can't say that. So we make it sound nice, neighborhood schools. We're against forced busing. In Detroit, for instance, in Michigan, they used a white woman, kind of looked like you. I don't mean to, but she kind of looked like you. She's real cute, pretty, and she was the face, saying, why are they doing this to our children? And in North Carolina, after Brown, they did something called the Pearsall Plan. The Pearsall Plan, that's how we got all those private little Christian schools in North Carolina. The Pearsall Plan basically said, if you don't want to abide by the Supreme Court ruling, you can take this public school money and go to, and create your own private school. So privatization didn't start with Alec. It started as a response to the first Reconstruction and continued in response to the second Reconstruction. Social safety nets are called socialism, but corporate welfare is called investment. Urban becomes the new term for Negro. And states' rights becomes the new language for we want to keep things like they are. And law and order becomes the new term for locking up those white people and those black children, those white children, and those Latino children that are creating all this ruckus and not going along with what we want. And what attack did we see? What attack in the second Reconstruction? It started with attacking voting rights. It started with attacking public education. And it also started with killing leaders by depressing the movement by literally murdering people like Nigger and Malcolm and Martin and Viola Russa, a white woman who was transporting people from Selma to Montgomery and killing 4 little girls 7 days, 50 years, 7 days ago, this past Sunday in the Birmingham jail. Richard Nixon gets elected using this Southern strategy. He gets elected on the Southern strategy, talking race in code. When he gets elected, the war on poverty is shut down. Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney are put over the office of economic opportunity. And they use the office to destroy the office of economic opportunity. And a whole litany of people are put in place to try to see how they can roll back the impact of Brown versus Board of Education, which is why in North Carolina, most schools didn't even have partial desegregation until 1971. I'm 50 years old. I went to desegregated public schools. But my parents made a decision in 1967 to come back home from Indianapolis in order to be a part of trying to integrate public schools in Washington County. Then you get Ronald Reagan. He signals that we really have ended the second Reconstruction when he does one of his initial campaign stops to run for president in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Then when he gets elected, he defunds many of the agencies that keep the stats on racism. Then he stands up and says there's no racism in America. Then he launches trickle-down economics to redistribute wealth to the already wealthy. And then there's an all-out attack to defund public education. And in the 80s, Alex is secretly born. And the second Reconstruction begins. And even Democrats like Clinton get caught up in the ending rhetoric of the second Reconstruction when he ends so-called welfare, calls it work, but they never create the jobs, so they disable people's ability to survive. See, this is power. And then we go through this period of kind of wandering around, doing the best we can. We get a few victories like Leandro in North Carolina, but then they don't even fund that. Even it's like you got criminals walking around with been convicted by the courts, and they don't even pay their bill. That's what happened in North Carolina with Leandro. The court said North Carolina was violating its own constitution, 1999, and the state has still not paid that debt. So we kind of meandering around. And then in 2008, we had this election in the South. Now everybody says it's about President Obama, but it's deeper than that. It's not who we elected, it's the electorate that elected him. And it's the new political atmosphere. President Obama gets elected and he wins Florida. Well, they kind of Southern, but they got a lot of Northern. He wins Virginia. Yeah, that's kind of Southern, but y'all got North Virginia. But then he wins North Carolina. That's straight up Southern. Yeah. Ain't voted for a Democrat since 1976. The home of Jesse Ham, where Jesse Ham ruled for 20 years in a state 3-1 Democrat. And Obama, a black man, born to a white woman from Kansas and a black man from Kenya, but in America, wins. And it wasn't supposed to happen because actually Obama loses in North Carolina. The truth is, on election day, President Obama lost. He lost 65 counties in North Carolina. He only won 35 counties, 14,000 votes. That's about 100 votes per 140 votes per county. But what he won, what it signaled was the beginning of the third Reconstruction, because it was black people and white people and Latino and young and old and people of faith and LGBT and straight and gay and labor coming together in the South to create a new fusion alliance unlike which we had not seen since the 1800s. And what do we see immediately? Before he even was inaugurated, a meeting. You gotta stop this, because this third Reconstruction is a little different. Now they got somebody in the White House. Oh Lord. The other Reconstruction, we might go wait 30 years. Or like in the second Reconstruction, 54 to 68, that's 14 years. But the third Reconstruction, they started immediately. And what did they start with? They said we gotta stop him, the attack on him and what he represents. Number 2, they attack voting rights. Number 3, they attack public education. And number 4, labor rights. And immediately the goal was shut it down. Why? Because unlike in the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction, now African Americans in key southern states control 20, 25, and in some places 30% of the electorate. So now if you hook that with Latino and you hook that with progressive whites, 33% African Americans in Mississippi now in the electorate. North Carolina got 25% African Americans in the electorate. You add 4% to that or 3% to that, take a give or take some, that really means you only need about 23% of white to vote their future, not their fears. So they start. We see the worst redistricting plan since the 19th century. We see an all-out attack to suppress the vote. We see even things like they don't want President Obama to be on TV in public schools. Yes. Why do you think that is? We can't allow our children to get used to voting for somebody that's brown, but more importantly, to think outside of the white Southern strategy. Every Southern legislator starts proposing extreme voter suppression laws. And it's not just about the South, it's about the nation. That's why we can no longer let folk come in to the South talking about, we are a national office. In the Reconstruction period, state movements are national movements. Listen to what I'm saying. And you can't build a movement from DC down, you gotta build a movement from Montgomery up. We're in a different time period. And so what do you see? You see this all out that we gotta hold on to the South. It's the last hold. If the South breaks open, if Mississippi, North Carolina, and Georgia, and Florida start breaking open, then we lose control. So what do we see? The rise of the Redeemer Party of the 1860s, but it's called the Tea Party. We see a new white Southern strategy being cloaked in the language of Alex and the intensification of the Koch brothers' money. And every action, the attack on labor rights in the South is about holding down the third Reconstruction. The attack on public education and groups that represent teachers and public education is about holding down the third Reconstruction. When they tried to resegregate public schools in Wake County, it was a test. It was a test. If we can do it here in Wake County, then we'll spread it all over the South and the nation. The attack on the LGBT community is an attempt to split the South, split black and white people over some false moral issue. When you hear Senator Ted Cruz the other day say, we need 100 Jesse Ham, that's code language. We've got to stop this third Reconstruction because they just might educate every child. They just might give everybody labor rights. We just might get living wages. We just might have health care for everybody. When you see the House cut money for food stamps, what is that about? It's about reviving that racialized image of the black or the brown welfare queen. When you see them saying we'd rather shut down the government than do affordable health care, what is that about? It is about we can't afford for poor people and black people and brown people and white people, particularly out in the South, to understand that there is a connection between their vote and their health care, their vote and their living. Because if they mess around and get health care and they understand that they got health care because of who they elected, they might understand, like we understand in the South, you can't separate collard greens and fried chicken. And once they understand that, they'll never stop voting anymore. They'll vote, and if you expand the electorate in the South, then you change the South. And if you change the South, you change the nation and you change history. That's, my friends, is why this work cannot be about a grant. This work is about changing the nation. You got to understand, and you must pray for our extremist brothers and sisters and love them, but you must fight them because they see their world falling apart. When they, how old are you, my friend? Right out here with the gray hair, on brother right here. Yeah, right here.
65.
You're 65. So you remember Secretary of State. Where are you from?
Well, I live in Florida now, but I went to grade school in Richmond, Virginia.
Richmond,
in 1961, 7 years after Brown, and it's still segregated.
You see what I'm saying? And you got resegregation now happening faster than it was in 1970. But what the extremists are afraid of is him and me being in the same room. And working together. That's what they're afraid of. We're not afraid of, but that's what they're afraid of. Huh? They want to stop the third Reconstruction. And because we understood that, give me 5 minutes. Because they understood that, we understood that in North Carolina. Before y'all heard about moral money, 7 years ago, and this is what I want to give our organization, we started building a new fusion movement called Historic 1000 on Jones Street. Because we understood we were in the middle of the third Reconstruction. And we understood that if you're going to organize in a Reconstruction period, you can't use the limited language of liberal and conservative, even progressive or Democrat Republic. You must have a new discourse. And in the South, it must be a language of anti-racism, anti-poverty, pro-labor, deeply moral, and deeply constitutional. It must be state-based, raising up indigenous leadership. And so what we did in 2007, we got the civil rights community in the room, we got the people that focus on labor rights in the room, we got education people in the room, we got people believing in poverty in the room, we got people believing in prison reform and criminal justice reform in the room, the environmentalists in the room, and the LGBT community in the room, and the faith community in the room. And we said, all of you all sit down and list 4 things that if they change would transform North Carolina forever. Not transactional things, just the next legislative season, but transformative things. We said, now go and list on the wall who in the state legislature, because if you're going to change this out, you've got to focus on state legislature. So that's what educational policy said. That's what voting rights are dealt with, and labor rights. And we said, who's against you in the state legislature? And we went around, and when we finished writing, we were the same people were fighting. If you're an environmentalist, the same people fighting the public educators were fighting you. You in the LGBT community, the same people fighting the labor rights people fighting you. And then we said, what the hell is wrong with us if we're not together? Understands who is against us and understands why we must have the ability to work together and why we cannot be single issue. Because there's no way you can be concerned about public education and not be concerned about voting rights. And there's no way you can be concerned about public education and not be concerned about living wages.
Tell it.
You see what I'm saying? So we said, why can't we get together? So we came together, formed this coalition. And after 7 years of working together, you remember that the same-day registration had been floating around the legislature with Democrats, not with Republicans, had been floating around 10 years. But when we came together, we won same-day registration. And that's how President Obama won North Carolina. Before he was ever a candidate, we created an atmosphere for same-day registration, early voting, Sunday voting. He lost on election day, but he won on the same-day registration. We began to win more money for public education. We won a Racial Justice Act, a number of other things that began to happen.
And so what you see in North Carolina, let me tell you, forget what the news is telling you, let me tell you what's happening. Let us tell you what's happening. The current extremists are fighting us because of our strength, not our weakness. And they decided that they would test us. See, we couldn't stop redistricting. And the Justice Department didn't stop it. They let it go through. We stopped them on voter ID with Beverly Purdue. She's the only Southern governor that vetoed it. But we couldn't stop redistricting. So in reality, almost 100,000 more people voted for progressive in last election. 70% of African Americans voted. 69% of North Carolinians, more than any other state per capita in the last 3 election cycles. But the reason we got all of these extremists in the U.S. Congress and in the State House is because of redistricting. They stacked and they packed 52% of black folk into 3 congressional districts, 49% of black folk into 19 out of 50 House Senate seats, and 51% of black folk into a little over 40 of 27 out of 120 House districts. They offered black people more representatives. They came to us and said, we're going to give you more black people. But we said, we don't want that because then you're going to undermine our fusion politics. And the goal of the Voting Rights Act was not just to elect black people, but to elect people. Now, some black people went for it. But the NAACP and us, we did because we knew the trick. The trick was we give you 10 more senators, we give you 2 more senators, but then we undermine your influence in 25 districts. Now they're just black with no power. And 1868 taught us you don't want to be black with no power. You want black power. You want black power hooked with white power, hooked with Latino power, hooked with LGBT power, hooked with faith power, hooked with labor power, so that you can create not just somebody sitting in the seat saying I'm a senator, but somebody that can get a bill out of committee. So they said, now we got this supermajority. They said, we only got about 2 years because people gonna wake up. So let's do everything we can. So the first 50 days, they cut 500,000 people out of Medicaid in 17 minutes in committee. They cut 170,000 people's unemployment in about 20 minutes. They cut 970,000 people's earned income tax credit so they could give 23 of the wealthiest families a tax break. And they defunded public education down to where now we're lower than Mississippi in both teacher salary and per teacher salary and per pupil expenditure. We're below. We're 50. We're now 50. And they changed the tax policy and added many, many other areas now on sales taxes and cut corporate taxes and cut wealth. And they passed the most vicious voter suppression bill in the country. But because we have been working hard for 7 years. Now, I'm going to say it again. When we organized 7 years ago, we didn't go to Z. Smith and say, if y'all give us some money, we're going to build a coalition. NAACP, I'm a volunteer. Every state Congress president is a volunteer. We said we have to build a coalition because we're in the middle of a third Reconstruction. If some money comes, God bless you, but we can't wait on it. And because we've been working together 7 years and trusting 7 years, in the middle of the Pentecost season, after they announced this monster voting bill they were going to pass, 17 of us went in the legislature to sing, to pray, and to lift up our agenda. Because we had the text messages, we had the emails, we had the tweets, we had the lobbying, we had voter registration, but we needed something to shock the conscience. Because their goal was to do it in the secret. Their goal was for us to say, oh, they got a majority, we might as well just wait till the next election. And we went in, not based on liberal and conservative, not based on Republican and Democrat, but a moral movement, 21st century fusion politics, rooted in the anti-racist, anti-poverty, pro-labor, deeply moral, deeply constitution. And this is why the language of moral versus immoral. Because you got to fight for some stuff because it's right. It got nothing to do with party. It's just right. Secondly, you need a new discourse. See, when you say liberal conservative, you automatically push some people out. You say Republican Democrat, you automatically push some people out. You say black white, you automatically push some people out. You can deal with race, but you can deal with it under the fabric of morality. And what that does is it brings people in. It gives people a place to come in. Secondly, what it does, it puts your adversary in linguistic trauma. Because how can they stand up and say, we just cut teacher salaries, fired 5,000 public school teachers, and it was the moral thing to do? We just took 170,000 people unemployment, and it's the moral thing to do. They can't do it. So you put them back on their heels. But the other thing you do with a moral argument is you destroy the myth that somehow you can hurt them and not hurt everybody. Yeah. And that's the myth of the old white Southern strategy. That's the myth of extremism. We can hurt some people and not hurt others. And so, when you're in the middle of a reconstruction, the conversation can't be about mere politics. It's got to be about the soul of the nation, the heart of who we are. It's not about transactional movements. It's about transformative movements. So we ask everybody, we say, here are 5 things we ought to be able to come. We don't need another conference. We don't need any more of these white sheets up on the wall. Here are 5 things. I'm going to give them to you. I'm not trying to mess up all y'all's work, but here we give them to you. NAACP, we came up with it. If we can't agree on this, something wrong with us. Number 1, we all, whether we're educators or labor fighters or environmentalists, ought to agree that we should fight for economic sustainability, addressing poverty, jobs, labor rights, living wages. Number 2, we ought to all be able to agree on educational equality, public educational equality for every child. Full funding of public education. We ought to all be able to agree on health care for all, protecting Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, implementing the Affordable Care Act, and environmental justice for poor communities. We ought to all be able to agree in criminal justice reform, addressing the disparities in the criminal justice system based on race and class. And we ought to all be able to agree on protecting and expanding voting rights and fundamental civil rights for every citizen. And we ought to all agree that those are moral issues. We ought to say never again will the so-called Christian right in the South dominate the moral authority. Never again will they get away with saying, the only moral issues are abortion, prayer in the school, and homosexuality. First of all, there's nothing about prayer in the school in the Bible. Second of all, your sex life is between you, your pastor, your priest, and your God. Ask any straight person to tell you about their sex life, and you'll hurry up and understand. It's between you, your priest, your God, and who you are. Ain't nobody else's business. And thirdly, the truth of the matter is the things that they lift up are really liberal. They're not conservative, because they liberally leave out the majority of the things the Bible talks about. Because there ain't about 6 scriptures in the Bible that talks about the issues they claim are moral. But when it comes to poverty, when it comes to treating children right, when it comes to treating people right on the margin, there's more than 400 scriptures in the biblical text, both the Hebrew and the Christian text, that deal with the issue of justice. Justice is love and justice is the centerpiece. That's why I tell them, I'm a conservative Christian, I don't know what y'all are. And if you really want a moral debate, bring it on. Because some of us know what the book says. The book says, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. The book says, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick, did you come see about me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? The book says, when you treat a child wrong, it would be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to offend one child. And you want a moral debate? Come on, I'm ready for it. And that's what a moral discussion does. Because there is nothing in this country that we've ever won that did not have a moral core. And too often, progressives and liberals, we have thrown the moral piece away. Yeah. Because you've been so offended by these right-wingers, and I understand. I get that. Reverend Bob, I hope you're not going to preach today. What else you going to do in the midst of all this crazy stuff? In a fight with one of my hands tied behind my back. I'm not going to give them one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. I'm not giving that away. All right. I'm not giving, we believe that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights among which are life, liberty. I'm not giving that away. I'm not giving away my faith stand for. I'm not giving that away when I know that the abolitionism had a moral center. Yes, the building of hospitals grew out of a moral center. Yeah. The building of public education grew out of a moral center. The New Deal grew out of a moral center. Social Security and Medicaid grew out of a moral center. Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 grew out of a moral center. My God, let's don't give that away. Here's the story. On April 29th, 17 of us went in. Because we've been working together, we didn't have to have a meeting to call everybody. It was a signal. We needed to have a legal strategy, a voter registration strategy, a social media strategy, a but we also needed a strategy to shape the conscience. We knew they might not change, but we had to shift the conscience of the state. 13 weeks went by. Nearly 1,000 people came doing civil disobedience. Now here's the fusion. 60% of them white, NAACP leaders. Some days more than that. Civil disobedience. Thousands of people coming. Now the last time, 15,000 people. NCCU was there with all the red shirts on, the teachers. We all connected, holding hands around these 5 issues, around this agenda. Now, after 13 weeks, they call us foolish, morons, whatever name, they call a bunch of names. But at the end of the 18th one, was this past Monday, the governor who was at 60% when we started is now under 35%. Now, less than 1 out of 5 North Carolinians agree with the legislature. But tomorrow Monday is polling about 47, 48% in the polls. One publication lists our governor, the 18th worst governor. Tomorrow Monday is one of the top 40 movements in the world. What they thought they were going to be able to do in the dark is now being exposed to the light. And they thought it was just a Raleigh issue, so we left Raleigh when they left. First meeting out of Raleigh, Asheville, 7% African American, but 10,000 people showed up in Asheville. 10,000 people. But and on August 28th, we did 13 simultaneous rallies, 13 all at the same time at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And nearly 20,000 people showed up from Silver all the way in the west to Elizabeth City all the way in the east. Yeah. But let me give you 2 more stories of hope. I knew we had a movement, and I knew this will work across this nation. And in this movement, y'all are trying to build, hook up with the NAACP. Don't try to be, you can't do this by, you don't have to create all new stuff. Don't, you bring your allies together. Use moral language and constitutional language, like the good of the whole, the common good, the general welfare, domestic tranquility. And let me tell you what it does, strange things happen. Steve, a few weeks ago, as I close, I was invited to go to Mitchell County, North Carolina. I have to be honest with y'all as a preacher, when I got that invitation, I said, y'all got to be crazy. I'm not, now, I get enough death threats as it is. I'm not going right in the heart of it. Mitchell County is 99% white and 89% Republican. And Tim Tyson, my good friend and historian, said they want you to come up there. And I said, Tim, you know the history of Mitchell County. They ran all the black folk out in 1920. I'm not going up there. Then I thought about and prayed about and talked to some people, and they said, yeah, let's go. We went up there, 3 black people, get up there at 6 o'clock. And of course, that morning, I preached hard in case I didn't get back. I kissed my wife real good. And we get up there, it's about 300 people in the parking lot, all white. We walk in the building, and they tell me that they're Republicans, but they're not extremists. They're not like this crowd. And they asked me, will I sing with them, blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. And they say, if you come here today to talk about moving forward, not about Republican Democrat, we want to hear it. And so I took about as long as I paid here today and talked about the issues and talked about the moral dimensions of them and how they were morally indefensible and constitutionally inconsistent and economically insane. Yeah. And at the end of the meeting, they said, well, let me tell you why we invited you. The Republican chair last week renounced his party. Wow. We've been coming tomorrow Monday for the last 5 weeks. The Republican chair, former Republican chair's daughter, has been coming tomorrow Monday. They said, we believe in the Jesus who overturned the money check. And we invited you to let you know we're organized with Tomorrow Monday. We've been holding pre-Tomorrow Mondays every Sunday. And we're going to get rid of this guy that we sent out because he said, because when they attack public education, they attack us because all we have up here in the mountains is public education. And public education job. When they attack unemployment, they attack us because there's 15% unemployment up here because the textile mills have gone and the railroads have gone. When they attack voting rights, they attack us in the mountain because people dismiss mountain people. And when they attack the environment, you don't mess with a mountain versus water. They said, brother, there ain't a lot of difference between mountain populism and civil rights activism.
Wow.
And we joined hands, and the next day they brought hundreds of people down to that rally in Nashville. Then I went to Lincoln County on August 28th. The Klan had put out, my security found a lot of negative stuff online. Some of us better not come to Lincoln County, suggesting what they might do. They tried to scare the people. They told the teachers they couldn't even attend our rally. I said, we gotta go. I'd been invited to Charlotte, but I had to go to Lincoln. We got to Lincoln and there were 22 cops standing out there. All right. We get out of the car. One of the white cops come up to me and said, Reverend Barber, don't worry about a thing. He said, we got your back. I said, no, brother, explain that to me. I was born at night, but not last night. He said, no, you don't understand. He said, we didn't know the NAACP fights for labor rights and for collective bargaining for public employees. And we don't have collective bargaining right now. We put our line, we wearing bulletproof vests. We don't have collective bargaining. But Reverend Barber, you may not know, 40% of our wives are teachers. 40% of police officers and wives and organizers are teachers. And so when this crowd, he said some of us voted for it, but we didn't vote for this. We with you, brother. And when I began to talk about the dream, Dr. King, bigger than just a black dream, they were out in the audience saying, preach, Reverend. And they signed up. And the teachers in Lincoln County defied the order, and they came out there with their red shirts on. And then one day at Moral Monday, where's Paige? One day at Moral Monday, we had about 120 people get arrested. But I knew then that a moral movement that's anti-racism, anti-poverty, pro-labor, deeply moral, in the Constitution is the only way to change the South. Hooking those who believe in education, those who believe in voting rights, those who believe in labor rights, hooking us all together, not just being in silos. I knew it when I saw Rosanelle Eno, 92 years old. Started doing civil rights when she was 8 years old, and she learned math, and she found out the sharecropper was cheating her mom and dad, and the Klan tried to kill her at 8. Then she organized, registered 5,000 people to vote in her lifetime. She had to read the preamble of the Constitution backwards to somebody who couldn't read it to register to vote. Klan has burned crosses in her yard at least 5 times in her lifetime. And on that day, when we went into the state capitol, which must be the target, don't forget that. You want to change the state, you got to change the nation, you got to change the South. You want to change the South, you got to change state capitals. And we went in to do civil disobedience, to shine a light of truth on what they were doing. She grabbed the hand of another woman who was 90 years old and was white. And I said, look at this. Both of them were born in the time of the deepest separation. Both of them were born in a time where black folk were raised to be afraid of white, not even look them in the eye in the South. And whites were taught that black folk were subhuman, that the signs separate but equal were what God meant. And yet here we have 2 women in a moral agenda who love voting rights, who love health care, who love public education, who love criminal justice reform, who love economic justice. 90 years old each, holding hands, walking into the legislature, saying to this extremist crowd, you're wrong. We've already lived the history you're trying to relive, and we're not going to let you do it. And both of them walk in together and submit to arrest with young people, some of them as young as 20. And you want to know why? having such an impact, and why I believe that you're right. If we will do it across this nation, we can change it. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And Mother and Sister Eaton tells us this. She says, boy, let me tell you something. She's on the corner board. She says, all this praying without doing something ain't worth a flip. But when you pray, and then you put legs on your prayers, and you believe in something, boy, greater than Republican and Democrat. You believe in something greater than liberal and conservative. You believe in treating folk right. You believe that every child can be educated, and every sick person can be made well, and every poor person can get a living wage. And when you believe that, and you're willing to walk in and stand on it, and even if they put you in jail, submit to it. If you do something, God will help you. Because God has always helped those who would do something. Moses stretched out his rod and God helped him. David threw his rock and God helped him. Esther went into the king, God helped her. Harriet Tubman had epilepsy, but she did something and God helped her. Susan Canton Staten did something. Thurgood Marshall did something. I believe in this third reconstruction, if we do something together, God will help us. And history will record that this reconstruction did not end, but it was finished because we did something.
We've got planes to catch, but Reverend Barber says if anybody wants to ask a question, we'll be here. By the way, I forgot to mention of all the things that Reverend Barber is, he's also a preacher. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time. Godspeed.
More people need to hear that.
I did it for me, okay? You can think more photos. Yeah. Stand way off the side of the road. Thank you. Tell them to put it on our account, the SAF master account. Danielle, everyone is asking you. They're like, what are you going to do? Thanks for
you remember any of and I want you to see this person. He's not a child anymore. Look at them.
That's one part of it.
Thank you.